The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the Apex Vendor webcast, Breaking Bad Habits with Continuous Supply Chain Planning, sponsored by Anaplan. My name is Kia Wood, editor at Apex. Please note that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Anaplan website in the near future. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we will save time for a question and answer session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you'll see a questions box. To ask your question at any time during the presentation, simply type it in the box and click Send. Should you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar Tech Support at 1-805-617-7000. Again, that's 1-805-617-7000. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Mark Smith is responsible for the overall business and research direction of Ventana Research and drives the global research agenda covering both business and technology areas. He defined the blueprint and methodology for improving business by using benchmark research to provide guidance across people, processes, information, and technology. Mark is an expert in enterprise software and business technology innovations, including business analytics, big data, cloud computing, business collaboration, mobile technology, and social media. Mark started Ventana Research more than a decade ago. He has worked in the software industry for 25 years, leading innovations in research and technology. Mark was rated the 2011 Software Industry Analyst of the Year by the Institute of Industry Analyst Relations. Mark is also ranked as one of the top 10 technology influencers in 2012 by Human Resources Executive Magazine. Vivek Soneja is Global Head of Supply Chain Solutions at Anaplan. With more than 20 years of consulting and industry experience, Vivek's management expertise includes business IT operations strategy, business transformation, enterprise improvement, supply chain management, and program management. He also has strong expertise in managing and delivering large and complex technology-enabled transformation programs. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Mark and Vivek. They're going to begin the presentation with a quick poll.
Fantastic. It's great to be here today, and this is Mark Smith from Ventana Research, and have the poll come up for everybody to participate in. So the question is, when developing plans, is planning data easily accessible? So if everybody could actually select one of the four options. The first is all the numbers and planning data. Second is most numbers and planning data. The third is we have limited ability to measure. And the fourth is we are unable to measure. So let's take a quick second while we gather that information. And welcome to everybody today. We're glad to have you here and give you some insights, myself and Vivek from Anaplan, and talking about some of the big opportunities and challenges in continuous supply chain planning. With that, I think we'll go ahead and close the poll. And so the poll results actually look like that the majority of you, 52%, most of the numbers and planning data. And second, 38%, we have limited ability to measure. 6%, all the numbers and planning data are available. And thank goodness, only 4% of you have state that you're unable to measure. So looks like there's a big bulk of you there in the middle. And today we're going to get some insights to how you can improve your supply chain planning and some of the dynamics that are happening in the marketplace. I think we have one more poll that's coming up as well. All right, the poll is open. And since I have it here, I'll go ahead and read that one there. The second poll question, are plans and annual budgets linked in your organization? Please pick the option closest to the situation. So you'll see that the first response is yes, we have direct and real-time links. Second is yes, we have data for budgets and planning. The third is detailed budgets and updates are only. The fourth is no, we have no linkage between plans. So we'll just give it a second here to get some of your input, and I'll be actually presenting what our market research has found in these two questions a little bit in my presentation coming up here in about 5 to 10 minutes. So we'll give this a little bit time to populate. And we're happy to have a large audience today, and as part of the this Apex educational webinar as well. All right, I think we'll go ahead and close the poll. So again, the question was, are plans and annual budgets linked in your organization? Number one response is 44% of you said yes, we have data for budgets and planning. The second response was detailed budgets and updates. Third was 20% said yes, we have direct and real-time links. That's pretty impressive. Maybe they're using Anaplan. And the fourth is no, we have no linkage between plans. That was 7%. So thank you everybody for taking those polls and everybody coming on to the webcast. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about breaking bad habits and continuous supply chain planning, which is a topic that I've felt passionate about for some time actually, as I've been involved in the areas of business planning and how that actually aligns out to the line of business areas for a couple of decades. And we've focused specifically around expertise and best practices on planning here at Ventana Research. So again, thank you everybody for coming today, and go ahead and get started. So as all of you know, the dynamics around supply chains, the need to be interconnected has become one of the top, not challenges, but opportunities for organizations to really perform at peak levels, right? It's complex because we now have a marketplace where the expectations from consumers and suppliers on the supply chain to be able to fulfill orders as quickly and efficiently as possible has become we've become kind of a real-time society around the globe. And the pressures on manufacturers, distributors, and the whole area of logistics has become really challenging to operate in this 7x24 real-time environment. And consumers, of course, have expectations on real-time responsiveness and become quite impatient if they cannot find out what the estimated fulfillment time might be. And of course, we have not just the need for availability of inventory, but we have the dynamics of logistics of getting products from such locations to the actual customer or supplier who's moving those into their own retail distribution. And of course, we've talked over the last decade about not just the Walmart effect, but now the Amazon effect and the dynamics and pressures that have to actually become part of our operational responsiveness to how we manage supply chains and how do we actually drive better responsiveness. And of course, this is easy to talk about for all of you. You live this on a daily and hourly basis. But unifying the supply chain does require a continuous stream of interactions and information to ensure that we are actually able to respond accurately and decisively based on the demand signals that are created from both marketing and sales activities, distribution and inventory needs, and how those all come together. And it's really kind of a challenge today because historically we've kind of put together these little bubbles of activities, silos of activities that aren't as well interconnected into this notion of continuous planning. And continuous planning is really this next stage of effectiveness for the supply chain that takes the context of the things that we learned over the last decade around integrated business planning and now puts this thing more into a process, people, and having the dynamic and responsive natures of how do we connect together the information that's required on both to respond but proactively meet the needs of the marketplace. And that's a real critical element because we've got to ensure that we do work in a very unified manner and that planning is at the heart of what we have to do to proactively perform at the right levels. It's not just about execution, supply chain execution, and a lot of the elements of the past. It's about how we plan and an appropriate ensure the execution is able to work in a more in a continuous manner that's required here to meet our needs. Now, continuous planning requires sophistication. So we all know that the sophistication that we have in many organizations has come down to a lot of both art and science of where we've got experienced professionals like yourselves, but as we move to this continuous planning approach, we've got a collection of people across departments who all have to work together in a more seamless manner, right? We can't operate in a clipboard, spreadsheet-based kind of environment anymore because that's not going to be able to respond as quickly as possible. And so we have to be able to do the kinds of scenario planning, driver-based planning, understanding the notion of rolling periods, and all that has to have great process support, collaborative capabilities to ensure that we can actually discuss and do trade-offs of particular planning decisions. So we can't just expect that we're going to be discussing these on a weekly telephone call or do emails back and forth, because the dynamics of what's happening when we work in this unified environment put pressures that we've never faced before to be able to respond. Now, there are some bad habits, and kind of part of the thematic of today's webinar and some of the research we do is that, we find that many organizations have limited linkage in their planning cycles, right? And so we kind of talked a little bit about this dynamic of making sure we can link together both summary and detail in a unified approach. And unfortunately, less than a third of organizations actually have this, only a third, 30%, have direct links between their plans, budgets, and updates. And so if you think about that, a need to be able to interconnect this is critical for us to be thinking about how to actually work more seamlessly together. And this lack of linkage is typically because we've got silos of planning processes and underlying systems and spreadsheets and legacy systems that are not integrated or unified, creating some pretty big divides for organizations and where mistakes can happen. And we know if mistakes happen and we're not able to, have the right inventory allocations that are going to appropriate distributors or directly to customers, every impact there is huge, because it either could come in violation of service level agreements that you might have in place with your distributors and retail partners, or you're going to miss expectations of direct delivery to customers who also, as we all know, can easily turn over to social media and actually talk about why they're not so happy with the experience they had. So those dynamics and those bad habits have a big impact. The second bad habit is not making planning data accessible, right? So it's important to have the information readily available, right? So we find many organizations still manually assembling data sets with great analysts who are spending too much time on the data activities, not as much on the planning and decision-making activities. And they spend time on validating accuracy because they've got these silos of data and systems that link to their processes. So when we have planning data kept in multiple spreadsheets, separate systems, there's just the inability to actually be able to make the right kind of trade-offs and those decisions that are required to be able to meet the supply chain needs. So it's important to have a centralized and continuous planning environment because it helps facilitate a much better environment to operate and perform in the market. Now, the next bad habit is spreadsheets create errors, and they frankly waste time. And we all know that we love spreadsheets. They're great personal productivity tools. The challenge is that they end up creating issues when we're trying to actually simplify the planning environment. And we've got a range of these kinds of particular issues that are happening that we can't address because we've got all these different spreadsheets. And everybody's updating their own numbers. They're not interlinked, or they're overriding things because they haven't really thought through how to build the right kinds of secured environments within spreadsheets. Spreadsheets weren't designed for continuous planning. They weren't designed for real enterprise software. And our research find that spreadsheets dominate the planning process more often than not in a supply chain and sales and operations planning environment. So, 80% of supply chain organizations have spreadsheets dominating that function, just as sales and operations planning. So we all know there's opportunities for improvement. We should all ask ourselves, we look at the spreadsheets, what are we doing in these separate spreadsheets? Why cannot that be brought into a secured environment? And continuous planning and planning environments that operate can provide their own personalized kind of sandbox environment to do separate kinds of analysis, and then take some of those things and bring them into a unified model that everybody's interoperating with. So there's huge opportunity to improve on one of the largest bad habits that impact supply chain success. The other bad habit is plans become stale and not relevant, right? We've seen these kinds of issues where the lack of having real-time, up-to-date information that can be used on a continuous basis really does impact the issues that are facing organizations. So as we can see, demand plans, and the whole area around capital spending that's required for supply chain, they all become irrelevant if they're not up to date and they're not including the right kinds of information that can support our particular needs. Now, moving from some of the bad habits that I'm sure all of you can appreciate, one of the other things is really moving beyond just traditional sales and operations planning and thinking around inventory optimization, because inventory and our allocation of inventory and where the inventory is actually placed across the supply chain to meet the demands of the organization is critical. And many organizations work on allocations, of inventory, right during or after manufacturing cycles, or have to redistribute it based on demands within their marketplaces, right? So some of the demand planning functions and looking at some of the trade promotions and things impact availability of inventory and where should that be placed. And we have to start to unify traditional sales and operations planning more into a direct manner of understanding where inventory needs to be to actually meet particular fulfillment and service level requirements of our distribution and retail partners. Now, as we think about dimensions of planning, one of the elements that's really important is to really think more comprehensively around supply chain planning, right? So supply chain planning and thinking about the needs, it's also how we actually can bring together both the people from an ownership and collaboration across the different functions that I mentioned earlier. We have to understand how it interacts with the processes we have today. We have to have a unified set of information, and that information is not just particular data points in a plan, but it's information around our supply chain and having the context of understanding the needs that are coming from our marketing, sales, and customers, but also how we're competitively operating and how responsive we can be And of course, then having the right technology, because none of this is possible without having the right investments in technology that support our peoples and processes, but most importantly, have information, right? Many organizations have collections of spreadsheets, they generate information. It's just not real time, it's not accurate, it's not responsive enough, and thus impacts and impedes the full potential of the supply chain requirements. The other element of unifying inventory is, as I mentioned, is bringing the demand planning directly into this unified continuous supply chain planning arena, because demand planning and what our fellow partners in the marketing and sales and operations side are doing is looking to how they maximize their revenue potential, and having the ability to bring that in a more direct way so that we're all operating from the same plan can have a significant impact to how responsive we are in regards to requests that are being placed by particular channels or by major accounts that place orders, and we have to be able to respond to determine if we can actually commit to large volume order requests that are out there. So this requires a kind of a yet another way of operating, because demand planning and how we operate both domestically and internationally requires us to operate in a 7x24 global environment. And it's not just that we have this unified planning, but that is dynamic and unified, but it's also that we're able to collaborate, have notifications, because there's a whole workflow that has to happen around this process on approvals and exceptions that might be happening during the planning process. Now, we have believed for over 15 years that having this integrated planning environment is critical, and it's obviously critical for any supply chain optimization, because we have so many different elements of our supply chain that have to be streamlined. And just as we talked about earlier about the need for integrated and having information that's directly linked, our research finds that 2/3 of organizations that have their information directly linked are actually operating at peak levels, right? Their planning process works well or very well. And when we have little connection, then we don't operate as well. It's pretty direct correlation that we find in our research. And now organizations have to make sure they are enabling this, and that you're able to interoperate across these different activities in the supply chain. And that kind of gets to this whole element of agile planning, right? It's just, we've talked about, the agility needed in supply chains, the agility we need in our planning process to have iterative, fast, short planning cycles is critical to be able to operate in a changing market and competitive environment, and to the point that we actually have to do these kinds of scenario planning, right? So if we know what our manufacturing capacity is, we have to make sure that we're able to do the appropriate things from an inventory and allocation perspective, as I talked about earlier, because we're going to be, planning, replanning, assessing at any time of the day, and speed is of the most importance, but it's also the accuracy of how we operate within that short, stopwatch kind of environment, because we obviously want to respond. We want to be able to meet the expectations that are actually happening. Now, I talked a little bit about workflow, but planning is not some kind of static, state-based kind of environment. There are workflow, and there are decision points that actually happen in regards to the planning process. And as I mentioned, we can't all expect to be able to be immediately on a phone call to have discussions, review trade-offs, make decisions. We have to have this process work in a much more seamless manner. And having workflow and decision approvals that are linked together is critical. So planning requires the workflow and approval process to keep it operating 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The other element around planning is really having driver-based models, right? We understand the particular drivers that actually that we plan around in regards to customers, manufacturing turns within particular time periods, and in all the rest of the kinds of elements of both cost margin kinds of drivers that are used to determine how we actually operate across our supply chain, and important enough are also part of how we drive better intelligence into some of the front office aspects in regards to trade promotions and operations. So interconnecting and having a connected planning environment enables us to really start to have better key performance indicators that are used and then are monitored to understand how well we're performing within these elements. And of course, the more routine and faster in our planning process we are around these drivers that actually determine our level of performance, enables us to have much more intelligent conversations and decisions within the time periods that are needed. Let me talk a little bit about best practices before I pass it over and talk about what's going on here, because best practices are critical. And as we think around breaking these bad habits I talked about earlier, we got to focus on some of the positive elements of what we should be doing for driving improvements. Now, scenario planning for the supply chain is pretty obvious, but our research finds that 73% of organizations that are able to explore relevant scenarios have better plans that are accurate or very accurate, right? So a correlation between scenario planning and accuracy of plans, and when companies invest into a common environment, they operate twice as more accurately as they do when they have limited number of scenarios they can actually plan, because they've got silos of planning environments. And it's important that we think about how do we enable the scenario planning and understand trade-offs and impacts dynamically without actually having to have delays and review processes that can go across days or weeks of time. The next best practice is increasing the accuracy of our supply chain, right? I mentioned earlier that we understand the accuracy is critical, and supply chains, actually, as we look across the planning areas, you typically operate above average in regards to the accuracy of their planning process. We find that's because there's a lot of smart people like yourselves that are driving a lot of activity where they either have a unified planning environment or they actually have to do lots of additional work. They've got really smart analyst teams that are supporting these activities. And while the accuracy is really important, supply chain is operating, now the question is, what's the efficiency of that? And how well can we speed up our accuracy or speed up the time it takes to actually make decisions? Because accuracy is one thing. Now the question is the agility of the supply chain planning process to be able to support it. The next best practice is collaboration optimizes planning, right? Collaboration is critical. I think too many organizations think planning is kind of this, kind of one-off area where we operate, and collaboration is left to, as I mentioned, emails and phone calls. But when companies collaborate effectively or very effectively, they actually, their planning is managed well, right? So 85% of organizations that collaborate properly along the supply chain planning process manage it quite well. And we have to think about how we collaborate, right? How do we collaborate among plans, among people, among decisions? We need to have a more unified environment, and contextual collaboration along our planning process is critical, because having separate messaging and email systems out of context can actually lead to making the wrong decisions because we don't have the actual plan information in front of us. And the other best practice is properly evaluating planning systems. We found some organizations making some decisions on net new planning environments without really thinking through what are the real requirements that we need. And our research has found that a lot of organizations aren't focused on usability, and usability is the #1 evaluation criteria that we found in our research, because the usability of the planning system at all levels, from executives, management, managers, analysts, operations, there's many people with different competencies and skill sets, and so it's important to have the right kind of usability and our ability to review and act on plans, no matter if it's on our computers to our mobile devices. And then the second thing is around functionality. And so we got to have the right kind of capability to support some of these planning process and workflow and notification and analytics. But there's other things, right? We got to have reliability. This thing, a planning environment has to operate 7/24. And of course, now with planning systems operating in a cloud computing subscription-based environment, we don't have to worry about internal systems. We got to worry about access controls and things like that, having the right authorized people participate. But that requires making sure we understand reliability, manageability of the platform, how it integrates across systems, right? So there's a bunch of criteria here that we've got to think about. So really, the right software does matter, right? Continuous planning requires a dedicated planning application. It's been that way for decades. It's not going to change in the future. You can't go and use tools or applications not designed for a continuous planning environment and expect to get the results that you need. You got to have a whole series of capabilities that allow us to forecast, plan, communicate, and coordinate. We've got to have the right kind of cycle time support. We've got to be able to interoperate across departments and diverse planning needs, but they all come back to a unified plan environment. And we've got to simplify the administration, the manageability, and really make sure that the process and workflow of the supply chain is operating at the right levels. So continuous planning really does connect the plans together to improve the supply chain performance. So I encourage you guys that everybody be thinking about that, because this whole finance and operations supply chain, having a common environment can make a big impact. And that plan for success in the supply chain and the things that we've outlined as the characteristics of effective supply chain planning does bring together all the notion of connectivity and accuracy and participation, being performance management oriented, continuously improving, right? That's what you can do when you operate from a continuous planning environment. So as I wrap up here, maximizing return from your planning investments is really important, right? The supply chain is one of those areas where it's really essential to move forward. And I'm really happy to pass it over to Vivek from Anaplan, who I've known, also another guru in the supply chain planning environment, to really take it to the next level of how Anaplan makes that a reality. Vivek? All right, we can just pass over to Vivek.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks for the introduction. All the things that Mark talked about, we've been grappling with for decades, and some of the challenges that were not so big challenges have become so much bigger now, simply because of the volatility in the marketplace that Mark alluded to, the notion of Walmart effect and the Amazon effect, and that creates so much more volatilities. The consumer behaviors have changed, how people buy, sell, collaborate, distribute, get products out to the customer. All those processes have dramatically changed over the years. And as a result, the bad habits just cause tremendous amount of problems. And what we've done at Anaplan is have built a solution to essentially overcome all those challenges and also prevent folks from having some bad habits. I'm sorry, the slides are going ahead of me here. Bear with me. Very typical planning environment is what Mark talked about, which is you have tons of planning applications, tons of execution applications, and many of those applications you pull data out of, as shown in this picture that I'm assuming you're all seeing. There's a bit of a lag here. So you have ERP systems, you have MES systems, MRP, and the whole soup of alphabets that you see on the left-hand side. More often than not, folks bring data out of these systems into these Excel spreadsheets, and many of them tend to be humongous and complex worksheets, and then try to manipulate all that data to be able to make the right decisions, whether it's S&OP or supply chain decisions, understand the financial implications of those decisions. You have all kinds of offline management reports and so forth. And just the very nature of this process does not help anyone to do continuous planning that Mark talked about. And that's really what Anaplan helps to solve for. What we have built is a solution that we call connected planning, which essentially is a method to connect data, process, and people. We have ability to bring all the data into a single source for planning and decision making. By virtue of being in the cloud and by virtue of being able to do very rapid calculations in our in-memory calculation engine, and by virtue of being able to share that data very dynamically and collaboratively, not only within the organization, but also often across the organization, we're able to facilitate and enable the notion of continuous planning. That's the dynamic continuous planning in any area of your business. And that's the power that our clients are starting to now utilize in this connected planning environment. And when we say connected, what do we mean? You know, we often talk about supply chain planning mostly in the context of demand planning, supply planning, S&OP, some inventory planning, which the kind of things that you're seeing on the right-hand side in this picture here. But Mark talked about the ability to be able to link those planning activities to financial side, which is the financial planning areas. So that's why when we asked the question at the beginning of the presentation in the poll, you know, how many of you guys have common budgeting and planning and real-time integration between budgeting, financial planning, integration? I think the number was very small. 80% don't have that. I was actually surprised to see 20% do have that, which in our experience actually is much lower. And then it's not only about being able to connect financial plans with demand and supply plans and S&OP processes. It's also being able to connect those plans to business strategy. So there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes on in every organization in strategic planning area, and that is often done offline. The idea of connected planning is that you can actually see the impact of your decisions and its alignment, whether it's aligned with the overall strategy, whether it's getting you to the financial objectives, be it profitability, margins, working capital, and any other financial measures. And also a big challenge that drives supply chain in this day and age, especially with the product portfolios which are rapidly growing in every organization. You know, the notion of connecting product portfolio planning to demand and supply planning is another big challenge that we're seeing a lot of organizations grappling with, and connected planning capability in Anaplan helps to solve for that. Mark also talked about being connected to the market, right? You need to understand what's going on in the market all the time, simply because of the dynamic and volatile nature of what happens at customers. So you need to have a mechanism to be able to capture market intelligence on a regular basis and then continuously respond to that. And Anaplan enables that continuous response using the optimizer, which is built into our connected planning platform. So you're always able to optimally respond in this continuous planning environment to what's going on in the market and be more and more customer focused like never before. So that's the power of Anaplan. And what you see on this picture here is a very typical environment, planning environments that Mark alluded to. You know, you have transactional systems, data analytics tools. Some of this may look very familiar to you guys, which is, you know, you have planning applications like APO or BPC or Hyperion or any of those planning environments. And then all those Excel spreadsheets and databases and point solutions. And then decision makers are also the decision makers who are looking at it from strategy, marketing, sales, finance, supply chain perspective. And as you can see, by introducing that Anaplan layer in this rather dynamic and complex environment, also unifies the decision makers up on top. It helps all those decision makers to collaborate. And if you want to make changes to the connected plans in one area, you want to be able to understand and see the impact of those changes in other area of the organization or even outside your organization. And then if those changes are not aligned with where you collectively want to go, then you can make alternative decisions. And that's the notion of scenario planning that Mark also talked about. Ability to conduct many different types of scenarios, understand the implication of those scenarios, and continuously make updates based on overarching objectives, strategic and or tactical. That's really the power of bringing data, people, and plans together and tying it to all the other execution systems or analytic systems that you may have in your organization that are then used to follow through on those plans. So that's really how Anaplan empowers organizations to operate in today's dynamic environment. And you can use Anaplan to run your business in a very different way. We're seeing many of our customers starting out with using that connected planning capability, sometimes with only one business process, but more often than not, definitely across departments or areas or across the companies. And we're also seeing a lot of folks going outside the enterprise and doing collaboration and planning collaboratively with customers, suppliers, 3PLs, and other players in the supply chain. And by being able to do that, you're able to realize tremendous amount of benefits. And some of the examples that you can see here, we've seen much faster planning cycle times, as much as a reduction of 2 days from 2 weeks, what went on at Del Monte. Agility, which certainly helps to reduce variance from many drivers of variance, whether it's exchange rates or frequency and other drivers. Visibility, clearly it's a holy grail, as for many of us, is understanding what's going on in the entire supply chain and bringing all that data in near real time and making that available to decision makers. And certainly the extension capability, which is ecosystem level planning, applicable across vendors, suppliers, customers, partners, and providers. And that's really why our clients are loving us. And the notion of being able to look at your entire supply chain from soup to nuts and being able to plan it in the cloud, leveraging Anaplan's capabilities and connecting trading partners across the supply chain is really what the future is. And we're saying the future is here now, because many customers are already here and they're using these cloud-based capability. And this used to be a big problem in the previous generation technologies, simply because to achieve this kind of capabilities, people were trying to do point-to-point connections between enterprise systems and try to bring data out of enterprise systems, ERPs and the likes, into a third-party environment, and then being able to send the data, planning data back into execution environments. It used to be very kludgy and complex. And that's why the dream of end-to-end collaboration never really came to fruition, but Anaplan is now helping a lot of customers enable that vision and get there. And collaborative is a big driver for why Anaplan is in the market. So here's an example. By being able to connect different types of plans across the enterprise, you can actually execute strategic priorities. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's many different strategic priorities in different organizations, whether it's top-line growth or operational costs or bottom-line results or any other strategic choices. And then what the little dots that you see is all the different types of planning that folks do across the organizations. And then how do you connect all these dots is really where the magic happens. And the magic can happen very differently for different organizations based on where they are in their business cycles and where they want to go and what their strategies are and so forth. And this is an example of how Kimberly-Clark, a large CPG company, was able to leverage Anaplan. They didn't start out with a big bang implementation of let's connect all these plans across the entire enterprise day one. They started out by using Anaplan for revenue planning, P&L modeling, product profitability modeling, long-range planning. And by being able to do that, they were able to hit some of the value drivers on the left-hand side, which is mostly bottom line results and strategic choices. And soon thereafter, they were able to expand the footprint of that connected planning capabilities. And they were able to go to revenue planning, trade spend management, and other areas. And then they continued on that journey to expand the footprint to production planning, to inventory optimization, eventually tie it all together, bring OpEx planning together, revenue planning, forecasting, trade spend management came into the picture, and they're continuing on that journey. They're actually now, as we speak, they're in the middle of using trade promotion planning and trade spend management capability and expanding that footprint globally. So these plans can be connected within the enterprise, and then you can scale the footprint globally to get to the value that most folks are seeking by leveraging Anaplan's capabilities. What you see here on this slide is another case study. And this is more of a, how an architecture leveraging Anaplan can be put together to get to the kind of benefits that I just talked about. You can capture data from multiple data sources. And in this example, at Dairy Farmers of America, you can see data was being captured from ERP system, which is SAP. Data was being captured from markets, from other external sources. And using Anaplan Connect and data services capability, you bring it into the in-memory cloud data hub model that Anaplan provides. And then within the Anaplan environment, there is these applications that are no different from a typical app, which you can use that runs off of the data in memory. And you can do SNOP, you can do demand planning, you can do COGS planning, your workforce planning, SG&A planning, all those little dots that I talked about on the previous page. And then being able to connect all these in memory, you're able to run all kinds of what if scenarios, collaborate, agree upon numbers, tied to budgets, planning, forecasting, any other strategic goals or financial goals or product portfolio goals. And then as you're executing, you can also do reporting and analytics. And that can be done by leveraging some of the built-in dashboards, or you can build any kind of custom dashboards. Many of our clients are now starting to call it the supply chain control tower type of capability, which is truly understanding what's going on across the entire supply chain and rendering that visibility into the so-called supply chain control tower. So that kind of capability helps clients to get to the kind of benefits that you see on the right-hand side here, which is agility, flexibility, self-service, profitability analysis, sales and operations planning, and so forth. And of course, to do it all together, the glue is ability to manage data effectively, and that's why you need a robust master data management and data governance platform, and Dairy Farmers was able to accomplish that using some of the data hub capabilities within Anaplan. So that's how a typical architecture comes about. And in this particular scenario, again, it's a journey. So before Anaplan, as Mark alluded to, lots of folks were spending lots of time chasing data, as much as 60% of their time, and very little time doing actual analysis and planning. And we were able to flip that over, and folks are now able to spend more time doing planning and analysis and less time chasing data or manipulating data or dealing with data challenges or issues. And the core capabilities, which is not only data processing, data management capabilities, but the whole in-memory processing capabilities within Anaplan help you accomplish that. And as a result, over a period of time, you can get to the kind of cost savings that are depicted here. And you can see, the types of resources. In this particular example, you were able to accomplish that with a handful of resources who can then put that planning environment operationally within the organization very quickly. In this particular example, many of these use cases that I just talked about, they were implemented within 10 to 12 weeks, in many cases 8 weeks as well. And you can continue to build on bringing on these new and near use cases over a period of time and value keeps on going up and the overall cost keeps on going down as you go through this type of a transformational journey in leveraging Anaplan. So all said and done, tremendous benefits that clients have realized and continuing to do so as they're going through their transformation journey in terms of SG&A saving, in terms of headcount, in terms of time saving. So all said and done, you get improved informed decisions, improved productivity, increased speed. And a study was done by Forrester, and some of our clients are starting to see as much as 537% ROI for their investment in Anaplan. So we like to call connected planning as a accumulation of three major capabilities. So connected planning by very nature is integrated, tying all these different types of plan together, but it's also dynamic, collaborative, and intelligent. And as you can see from some of these examples from different clients, many clients are able to realize many different types of capabilities, leveraging these dynamic, collaborative, and intelligent capabilities within Anaplan. So I think we do have a few minutes for Q&A here. So Mark, I'm going to hand it off to you, and we can take some questions if we have some questions in the audience.
Actually, I'm going to jump in, Vivek, and moderate this question and answer session. Now that we are in this Q&A segment, please use the questions box on your GoToWebinar toolbar to send in your questions so that Mark and Vivek can personally answer your questions live. We've already had some questions flowing in during the presentation, so I'm going to jump right in. Someone asked, before choosing a software application to use, should you not establish your process first? The way you choose software based off of your process and not process based off of your software.
Yeah, this is Mark. That's a great question. And yes, you should have your process defined. You should have identified places in your process where you want to drive improvements or you have issues, or maybe what I articulated as bad habits. So look at areas for improvement, and most organizations can get that, they've got some level of the process already documented, the workflow. So yes, it should be done prior to a selection criteria, because you got to make sure that you have software that's, adaptive, dynamic. It unifies together the supply chain processes in a more efficient manner. So excellent observation, and I absolutely agree.
Great. The next question I have is, does this tool generate dispatch planning based on companies' manufacturing capabilities and dispatch capacity?
So if I understand the question, I'm assuming it's dispatching some type of resources, whether it may be in transportation scenario where you dispatch trucks or anything like that, and you have to manage the capacity. Any of those types of use cases, yes, we can absolutely handle, and we do have some built-in apps to be able to manage dispatching, scheduling, and capacity planning problems.
Excellent. Another person asked, can your system be customized to suit business needs? This question asker is specifically wondering about getting it as SaaS.
Well, Anaplan is a software as a service solution. So SaaS element is by default the answer. And yes, absolutely, very flexible, adaptable, and customizable to what clients may be looking for. As I alluded to earlier, you can pick and choose whichever use cases that you want to leverage the tool for in your organization. And it can be built specifically to your requirements. And we at Anaplan, we do have what we call the App Hub, and you can look it up on our website. There are some pre-built apps that you can use as jumpstart to what you're trying to build. But if you want to build something from ground up as well, the tool is very flexible and easier to use and build any of those capabilities from ground up as well. And as I said, we can build those use cases and apps within 8 to 12 weeks. So that's why it's very different from the monolithic previous generation ERP type of solutions in which you have to spend months, maybe even years. to build planning capabilities in your systems.
Excellent. And this is going to be the last question. A person wrote, "This tool sounds very powerful. Please share some of the implementation challenges and ongoing support required to ensure effective data transfer to cloud to support all the activities described."
Great question. Data is the river that flows through the planning applications to really make those planning use cases work. We have to, based on the use cases that you're looking to implement, first define what data you're going to consume, understand the data quality of what we're trying to feed into the system for it to enable planning capabilities. And if there are gaps and challenges there, then we absolutely have to address that. Getting data out of on-premise systems, enterprise systems into Anaplan, we do have connectors and standard tools to be able to capture and bring data into the data hub that I talked about. So that's really not a major challenge, but yes, we do absolutely have to address the security and data ownership. And we do have cybersecurity tools that we have built into Anaplan to help deal with some of those challenges, because in many cases, we're bringing data from on-premise solutions, systems into a cloud-based environment. And we do have all the capabilities necessary to manage, manipulate data, and then feed it right back as well in many situations to execution systems. So those architectures are commonly available, and we can help facilitate those capabilities during an implementation process. Our implementation methodology uses what we call Agile rapid iterative methodology. So that helps to deal with some of the discovery and challenges that you may find during iterative implementation cycles as well. And that's why we're able to do these rapid implementations, which span 8 to 12 weeks, very typically.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of APIX, I'd like to thank our presenters for their time today, and on all our attendees for participating in this APIX vendor webcast. As a reminder, this presentation will be available on demand on the Anaplan website in the near future. You'll automatically receive an email once the recording is available. If you would like more information on Anaplan or have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the Anaplan team via the contact information that was shown on the previous screen. All content and materials included in this edition of the APIX Vendor Webcast are the property of APIX and Anaplan and are protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved.